With me in the studio are Sarah Lunnon, Extinction Rebellion activist who organised the most recent demonstrations, and Miles Allen, climate scientist and author of an intergovernmental panel on climate change report. Welcome to both of you. Where were you today, Sarah? Where were you chained to? What were you doing?
No, I wasn't chained to anything today. I've spent most of today in studios, actually, talking to people and actually writing a speech.
Writing a speech. OK, and what do you do for a living when you're not protesting?
At the moment, I'm volunteering full-time for Extinction Rebellion.
OK, because that's one of the questions people ask us when they get in touch about your protests. Are people taking time off work? Do they do this full-time? How do they fund it?
So there's a number of people who are in London today who are taking time off work. My brother, for example, has taken time off work. My sister has recently given a job up. There's a number of people. One man I talked to today, Adam, he said, when you go into the TV studio, he said, make sure you tell them that I've taken 2 weeks off work to be here.
You're doing it full-time because you're volunteering, presumably investing savings or something into this. I asked the question because some people haven't been able to get where they wanted to get to because of these protests. They can't get to their jobs sometimes.
Yep, absolutely. And
do you understand why they lose sympathy?
To be the cause of that happening is really very, very upsetting. And to see that, yeah, it makes me feel really bad to know that I am disrupting people's lives, and it makes me really cross and angry that the lack of action over 30 years has meant that the only way that I can get the climate on the agenda is by taking action such as this. If we don't act and protest in this way, nobody takes any notice.
One of the other reasons some people say they are put off your movement, and I'll bring you in at this point, Miles, is some of the scientific claims don't stack up. Have you found some of the scientific claims made by those associated with Extinction Rebellion unhelpful?
Well, I mean, it was quite gratifying as I wandered through the demonstration yesterday to actually find copies of the IPCC 1.5 degrees report, which we worked on last year, on the tables. I think Extinction Rebellion actually have done a very good job of trying to stick as close as they can to the science. The key thing is the science doesn't actually tell you what to do. All we can do as scientists is tell you what the consequences of your actions are. And then it's up to people to decide.
But, for instance, the name Extinction Rebellion is inherently pointing towards we're going to be extinct. And there have been people, I've got quotes here, for instance, Roger Hallam, one of the three founders, said in August, perhaps you could answer this as well, slaughter, death and starvation of 6 billion people is the reality this century. There's no science that backs that up.
There's a lot of, well, I mean, you can come in on this, but there's a lot of science that backs up the very considerable risks we run if we carry on a path
to... But not 6 billion people. There's no science that calculates it to that level, is there?
There are a number of scientists who have said if we get to 4 degrees, which is where we're heading at the moment, 4 degrees of warming, they cannot see how the Earth can support not 1 billion people, 500 million people. That's 6.5 billion people dying.
Sorry, so you're going to stand by scientifically a projection that says within this century we'll have the slaughter, death and starvation of 6 billion people? It's just good for us to know.
No, because what we can do as scientists is tell you about the risks we face. The easy risks to predict, to be honest, are the ones that I do, how the climate system responds to rising greenhouse gases. The harder risks to predict are how people are going to respond to losing the weather they knew as their kids.
But I suppose the reason I asked...
risks, and so I imagine what they're talking about there is the risks of the human response to climate change as much as the risk of climate change itself.
But I suppose the point is, if there's no science that says that, do you understand why some people who are sympathetic to your cause also feel like you have fear-mongered? For instance, Roger Hallam has also said our kids will be dead in 10 to 15 years.
So, Emma, I don't know if you heard what Miles said there. He said we are losing the weather we know. All of our agriculture and our food is based on weather that has been around for the last 10,000 years. If we don't have predictable weather, we don't have predictable food sources. We run the risk of multiple losses of harvest in the world's global bread basket.
It's just to the extent that you are. It's just to the extent that you are projecting what you don't know onto the reaction of humans, and that can be counted as fear-mongering. Roger Hallam did say our kids, we just double-checked this before we came on, would be dead within 10 to 15 years.
There's a distinct possibility that we lose not only our food supplies, but our energy supplies. In California at the moment,
Miles
millions of
is chomping at the
people
bit to
do
get
not
in here.
have
Let's
electricity.
hear from a scientist as well.
There's a lot of possibilities in the future, and I think what was frustrating about this process is if we fixate on things we don't know, we're not even focusing on the things we do know, which is there are perfectly achievable solutions to this problem. I was in a fossil fuel company last week talking to them about 1.5 degrees, and I was asked the question, is there really any way of us solving of us getting to net zero emissions by 2050? And I asked them, well, if you had to make the product you sell carbon neutral by 2050, would you be able to do so? And they just looked at each other and said, yes, of course we would.
So is that
the
something...
solutions are out there.
But that's really interesting. Is that going to be one of your focuses? Because what we were just hearing in the film there is that there has been some of the people that you work alongside, you protest alongside, have talked about overthrowing capitalism, and yet here a solution might be working with some of the architects of it, the oil companies.
So Miles is talking about how we could move to net zero by 2050. Moving to net zero by 2050 gives us a 50-50 chance of staying at 1.5 degrees or below. That's not a risk that I want to take. So 1.5 degrees, we might stay within a stable climate. If we go over that, all bets are off, really. We don't know how hot it's going to get. I do not want to take a 50-50 chance on the future of everybody that I cherish.
Well, Sarah's just dumped all over that, quickly.
Let me come back to the 1.5 report. The risks go up with every half a degree of warming. Nobody's going to say, you know, oh, yes, we'll settle for an extra half a degree and it won't matter. At no point did we say that if we cross 1.5 degrees, the warming will immediately accelerate out of control. So what we're looking at is how do we manage to stabilise this phenomenon that's going on? And I think the key point is those saying we have to overturn capitalism in order to do it. My main concern is I don't know if we've got time to overturn capitalism first and solve climate change later. I'd rather enlist some of the forces we've got available to us today to solve the problem now.
I think you and Sarah are going to have a lot to talk about offset because we have run out of time, but there you go.
We've waited for 30 years for capitalism to work and it hasn't worked. And Emma, when you go home, you will look at your children and you think I've got a 50-50 chance of it staying within a world that we know as it is today.
Okay.
And the people looking at home,
thank you very much.
This is
where we have to leave it. Thank you very much for your time.